It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Rico Brogna Rewatch. It's the third annual edition of the Rico Brogna Rewatch. We all, or at least most of us, maybe some of us, maybe a few of us, have rewatched a classic game in Mets history, that being opening day 1985. And this entire episode is a break from rumors, a break from innuendo, a break from controversy fighting amongst ourselves concerning what the Mets are and what the Mets should do. Today is an episode in which we morph ourselves back into people living in 1985, and we are doing a podcast reacting to the New York Mets' dramatic opening day win against the St. Louis Cardinals. So here's how this works. If you didn't see the game, still listen to our podcast. We'll give you a nice recap of the game, plus our strong opinions about everything that happened. And if you did watch the game, put yourself in a world in which it's April 9th, 1985. I just got back from Shea Stadium, or I just got back from watching the game at a friend's house, and now we're potting, and we're talking about this game. So let's get right into that world. And the first thing I got to say, Hoff, the first thing I got to say is this. While I'm glad the New York Mets won on opening day 1985, I'm happy. They're 1-0. We beat those rat bastard arch rival St. Louis Cardinals. I'm pissed off at Davey Johnson. I do not understand the love affair with Doug freaking Sisk. Like, can you get his ass out of the game? It's the ninth inning. First of all, I'm stunned you're letting him bat in the eighth inning to begin with, which makes no sense. Then you allow him in the ninth inning to give up a one-out hit. Okay. With a one-run lead, by the way. Then you allow him to hit Lonnie Smith. Still keep him in the game. Then you give up a base hit to Tommy Hearn, which he's ahead of the count. And you still keep him in the freaking game. And then finally, when he walks Jack Clark, and he wasn't even close on any of those freaking pitches, that's when Davey Johnson, who must have fallen asleep. I mean, maybe Davey thought what we all thought, which is that this game was so boring that Davey Johnson fell asleep and decided, I'm going to leave Jesse Orosco in the bullpen. I got no use for him. You have a fresh bullpen. It's opening day, and yet he's smoking the Doug Sisk pack until they blow the game in the ninth inning. So that's number one I got to bitch about. I mean, you got to give me a break with that, Pete.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember how they used relief pitchers back in the day, but it seemed like they didn't just go inning by inning. It was more of like a, let's go until he screws up. And like you said, he screwed up pretty early on in the inning.
So, yes, and I'm glad you brought that because I understand that we are in a different world. We're also of the age where we don't remember 1985. So it's a different baseball world. Number one, I do want to point out, here's what I've known about Doug Sisk, a guy who was off of the New York Mets before I was watching baseball. What I know about Doug Sisk is that every Met fan booed the crap out of him. That in 1986, the following season, when the Mets won the World Series and everything was great, the one guy who would get booed constantly is Doug Sisk. Now, if you look at his career numbers as a New York Met, the numbers don't really back up that he was this garbage reliever. Oh, well, there are certain stats that do. I mean, first of all, I can't even imagine a relief pitcher, that would strike out 4 guys per 9 innings and walk 5 guys per 9 innings. Like, what the hell is that? But that's Doug Sisk. So my memory, or at least of learning about him, is that Met fans hated him. So the idea that he is being allowed to clean up Doc's mess in the 7th, and he really didn't because he gave up that bloop hit to Tommy Hearn, which brought him back in the game. So he didn't exactly clean up the Doc mess because he allowed those 2 inherited runners. He did pitch a good 8th inning, fine. But to allow him to pitch the 9th inning and to get into trouble the way he did, I know he was coming off a good year the year before, but you have a fresh bullpen. Like, it doesn't make sense. Even if you want to play that game of, well, we handled bullpens differently in 1985. Dude, he hit a guy to put the tying run on second with Tommy Hearn and Terry Pendleton coming up, and Davey Johnson's taking a nap in the dugout. So I'm sorry. Like, we can use the 85 excuse all we want, or Doug Sisk had a good ERA the year before. That is some garbage managing by Davey Johnson, period.
Now, the one thing I will say, And I'm not trying to give Davey a pass because I'm not really sure. Again, like we said, I'm not sure how he's trying to navigate this game here. But and again, I guess he's trying to win the game. At this point in time, they're winning. But they do, if for some reason it becomes a tie game or they lose the lead, the pinch hitters coming up next too. So like you're kind of wasting, Orozco if you have to get to him at some point in time, which is why I guess maybe he took a little bit longer to get to him. If you want to use him.
First of all, you cannot think that way in the ninth inning. And that goes back to his decision in the bottom of the eighth inning. Because remember, at that time, the Met lead is now down to 5-4. This was a game that it felt like they had in hand. Remember, they were up 5-2 going into the seventh inning. So at 5-2 seventh inning, Doc on the mound, you're feeling pretty good about things. But in the bottom of the eighth inning, with a 1-run lead and Sisk already getting the 6 outs, he's due to lead off the eighth inning. So are you not trying to get an insurance run? Are you not thinking if you're Davey Johnson, hey, I got a 5-4 lead, as much as I may want Doug Sisk to get the final 3 outs, maybe I should try to get an insurance run. And he lets Doug Sisk lead off the eighth inning. He grounds out. And then look at what ends up happening. Wally Backman gets robbed of a base hit. Andy Van Slyke makes that great diving play. Mookie gets a hit, steals second. They basically pitch around Keith Hernandez. Gary Carter gets hit for the second time. I mean, what the hell was going on with that? And you had a rally. And what's crazy about that is, so they end up loading the bases, for those that didn't see the game, and for those that don't remember, with 2 outs in the eighth inning, and it was Darryl Strawberry's turn to hit, and Davey was forced to pinch hit for him because Darryl had some kind of foot issue. Now, I looked into this. I looked into the future. He only misses 1 game, okay? Mets have an off day tomorrow or, in 1985 the next day. They didn't play. The day after that, Darryl was not in the starting lineup. He did come back for the Friday game against Cincinnati. So it turned out not to be a major injury. But because of Darryl being hurt, they go Danny Heap. Obviously, Whitey makes the pitching change. Then he goes to John Christensen. And so the inning goes dead. But the inning could have started off more promising if you're not letting your relief pitcher, Doug Sisk, bat for himself. Now, I feel bad. All I'm doing is bitching. The Mets won this game in incredibly dramatic fashion. I mean, Gary Carter makes his Met debut, and it's a walk-off home run. But before we celebrate that, I got one more thing I need to bitch about. Because that's
one more.
Well, there's like 10 more things. Look, that's what happens when you have high expectations. Mets are coming off a 90-win season in 1984. They go out and they acquire Gary Carter. Doc Gooden's in his second full season. I'm sorry, I got high expectations. This offense cannot leave 15 guys on base. 15. Okay? Now, early in this game, when they get the 2 runs in the first inning, you feel good, but they should have had more. I mean, freaking Joaquin Andujar couldn't throw a strike. He's trying to injure Gary Carter. He's hitting 2 guys. So they end up with 2 runs, but it should have been more. Then you go to the third inning. George Foster hits the home run. Great. Fantastic. Everybody's happy. Then they have another great rally in the 4th inning. Carter ends up grounding out with guys on base. They have another rally in the 5th inning. They tack on a run. They put 2 guys on in the 6th inning. They can't do anything. We mentioned the rally in the 8th inning where they had the bases loaded. Unfortunately, Darryl couldn't hit. But 15 guys left on base. That's a lot. I mean, what can I tell you? They could have won this game 5 ways to Thursday besides blowing a 5-2 lead. So the managing of Davey and the Mets offense's inability to take advantage of all the opportunities the Cardinal pitching staff gave him, plus the bad defense. Go back to that 9th inning. Remember, that inning continued because Tommy Herb boots an easy ground ball off the bat of Wally Backman. So it's a great win. I'm sorry. I hate to complain, but a lot of negative I took actually out of this one. I'm sorry.
Well, and not for nothing. Like you named it, you put his name out there already like 3 or 4 times. Tommy Herr was like a freaking MVP in game 1 of the season. Yeah. He was nonstop. He did everything. He was incredible. I mean, the first at bat, he fouled off 1,000 pitches with Doc Gooden. It was ridiculous.
It almost seems like Tommy Herr would be a great guy the Mets should acquire in the future, but probably shouldn't, but probably they probably shouldn't get him. Look, what could you say about Gary Carter? I mean, it's kind of crazy that not only in a much ballyhooed trade, for him to come up in a situation like that in the bottom of the 10th inning to hit the game-winning home run, that's great, and that's amazing in its own right. But think about the way this game starts. It's the bottom of the first inning. Gary Carter is up making his Shea Stadium New York Mets debut. Crowd's pumped up. It's sunny out. It's windy. Everybody that's there is so excited to see Gary Carter. We're still stunned he's a Met. And the second pitch of his Met career, Andujar drills him. And there is a thought as you're watching this game, holy crap, he's going to come out of the game. Like, I knew the result of the game, and I was still even wondering, like, what's going on here? So one thing that I guess we didn't appreciate as someone's or two people that didn't watch this game live or remember it or certainly know any of the intricacies of it besides Gary Carter at a walk-off home run opening day 1985, that's it, was how he could have come out of the game in the first inning. Like, that was absolutely on the table with the way Andujar drilled him. And I think that's a kind of like a fun little note about this, how it was so close to Gary getting seriously hurt and not even being in a position to hit the walk-off home run in the bottom of the 10th inning.
Well, it's funny because there was two major plays early on in the game. One was the Gary Carter hit by pitch, and the other one was Andujar trying to stop a ball that came up the middle, and he tried to tip it, and they came right out. I'm like, dude, this guy's done. If this was current day, he'd be out. He might be on the IL for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But that's the point is different type of ball players back in the day. Gary Carter, yeah, that looked bad. Hit the funny bone. It was terrible. But yet you just know that back in the day, those type of players, they're not going to sit out. Dude, he could have broken his elbow.
Oh, no doubt.
At least he might have been still would have played through 2 weeks of it.
No doubt. No question about it. There's a lot of things from this game we'll get to. We also have some emails to read at thericob@gmail.com. Some who had strong opinions watching this incredible Rico rewatch, the New York Mets beating the St. Louis Cardinals 6-5. Would you agree that this game, a classic game, I mean, it's a game we picked as a Rico rewatch. Overall, before we get to all the added intricacies from it, would you agree this was actually a terrible game? That this was it was a long game. It was 3 hours and 42 minutes, which I guess we could have known by just looking at the box score. But it was an ugly game. Like, the defense wasn't great. The wind conditions were awful. There were tons of pitches, and we don't know how many because, unfortunately, that wasn't a thing back in 1985. But it was a long, and dare I say it was kind of a boring game. Like, it was not a classic. Obviously, you had these big moments. You had certainly a bunch of home runs, 3 home runs in this game. You had the Cardinals rallying. You had the Mets winning it in walk-off fashion. You had a ton of base runners. So there was action in this, but we certainly didn't see Doc at his best. That's for damn sure. But it was not, I wouldn't call this a classic game. I'd say it had a classic ending, and it's certainly an amazing story that this Hall of Famer, this future Hall of Famer, making his Met debut would hit a walk-off home run against a division rival to start off the 1985 season. All that stuff's amazing. But watching this game in its entirety, this was not a great baseball game.
No, and you nailed it. Like, the first inning took over a half hour. Like, I went and I texted you. I was like, what the hell's going on? This is atrocious. You said it. Like, they should have scored more than 2 runs that first inning. But there was nothing going on. Everyone was just walking, getting hit by pitches. Nothing was really happening. And it was frustrating to watch. Again, Tommy Herr, like we said, the first at bat of the game for him, he saw like 10, 15 pitches. It was a drawn-out first inning that finally it started speeding up.
And look, you're basically hitting on it. Doc struggled. I mean, this was not elite Doc Gooden, and it's kind of frustrating because this is 1985. This is arguably one of the greatest single seasons by a pitcher in MLB history. Forget Met history. This is the crown jewel of pitching seasons, 85 Doc. Like, it's that good of a year that all you have to say is 85 Doc, like 68 Bob Gibson, and everybody knows what it is. So for this to be the start we watched of Doc is kind of disappointing because you're right. I mean, you go back to that first inning. Top of the first inning, he pitches a 1-2-3 inning. I mean, great. That's a victory in itself. He doesn't strike anybody out, and he throws a ton of pitches. Every hitter in that first inning, Lonnie Smith, Tommy Herr, and Terry Pendleton, all took it to 3-2 counts. Now, I will tell you, Lonnie Smith, the leadoff hitter from this game, should have struck out on the 4th pitch. This is
yes.
The other big takeaway is how bad the umpiring is. Like, I almost want to scream at my man Joe B, because Beningo would always tell me, bro, the umpiring's worse than it's ever been, bro. And I would always say, you may be right. You've seen a lot more baseball than me. I mean, how can I deny that? But I almost feel like because we have so much more replay now, and we have social media where we analyze everything, and sports talk radio, that I don't think the umpiring is necessarily worse now. It's that we talk so much about it. And for anyone who thinks that the umpiring was better in 1985, I want to take you to the 1-2 pitch to Lonnie Smith to start this game. It was literally a fastball right down the middle, and I think he went around. It was like a check swing.
Yeah.
You got two ways you can punch Lonnie Smith out, and home plate umpire Bob Engel says, that's a ball. Third base umpire Dave Malone, or whatever his name is, he didn't swing. It was such a strike. And even Steve Zabriskie and Tim McCarver, who started this game, because we had the rotating announcers, which we'll get into later as well, even they called it out and said, what the hell was that? That was, Hoff, that's an Angel Hernandez bad kind of call to start this game.
The only thing I'll say is this, is that today you have the pitching frame box, you have the angles are not as manipulated. Back then, like the angles of the pitcher to home plate, like they're off to the side. So I want to give a little bit more benefit of the doubt to the umpire. But yeah, there was a lot of pitches I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on in that one in particular.
Well, and you do make a good point about camera angles, because in that first inning, Terry Pendleton checked his swing. And for the life of me, he went around. I mean, it looked like it was obvious. They don't have that camera angle that we have now, where they'll give you that third base view. Obviously, Terry's switch hitter, he's batting left-handed. That look where you can see if he checked or not. McCarver was adamant that he didn't go. And they were actually analyzing the check swing by saying, well, the bat head clearly didn't go around. And I'm thinking to myself, in 2025, I don't even think the home plate umpire checks at third. Like, I see him doing the point himself, saying clearly he went around. And so my reaction is that's another bad call. But to your point about not having those camera angles, because we didn't have the third base view to see that check swing, we don't know for sure. But, man, for the life of me, it looked like Pendleton went around on that.
And one more thing, just to I'm throwing it off the trail for a second here.
Yeah.
Watching this game, I know it was recorded. It was on VHS. That's how it was, because I saw like the certain lines and stuff like that. But my God, 40 years ago, I don't know how you can watch a ball game like that. You can't see anything.
Yeah,
I
think unfortunately a part of that was what you said. I don't think, like, if you were watching that live on TV in 85, the reception would have been better. Now, it wouldn't have been the HD we're watching today, clearly. But I do think that that's one of the tough things about rewatches when you go back in time. It's not always the greatest condition. So I hope that for those that are watching or listening to our podcast, I hope you weren't completely turned off by the third inning and said, I can't watch this anymore. Maybe you jumped around, which I think is probably what most people did, especially for a 3.5-hour game. By the way, one other thing about Pendleton that also kind of felt very different from 2025 is that in the ninth inning, right before St. Louis tied the game, Pendleton struck out on an 0-2 pitch. Now, whether it's a ball or a strike, it probably was a ball. It was probably a terrible call. I think there was a lot of bad missed calls. But again, we're not getting the same replays. We don't have the strike zone right in front of us. So it's a little bit different. But Pendleton, after the strikeout, slammed his bat down, like immediately.
Yes.
That is an automatic ejection in 2025. How rarely would they give you the kind of the leeway, if you will, of, I just got shown up and I'm going to keep him in the game. So that was the other thing that jumped out at me, that Bryce Harper does that. Even a star like him, I think he gets ejected immediately if he does that.
Yeah, that was pretty aggressive. But again, it's 1985. It's opening day. There's a lot of leeway given a lot of different ways.
Absolutely. But that was kind of the fun thing. Like, there were a lot of little things, just tiny little things I'll point out that we just don't see anymore. One of which was how many times Doc Gooden threw over when Lonnie Smith got the base hit in the third inning. He was on with one on and nobody out. And Doc was obviously very concerned about Lonnie stealing a base. This is a St. Louis Cardinal team that they run. They don't have a lot of power. They'll run on you. And Doc threw over. I lost count how many times he threw over. There was also a pitch out, which even in this day and age now with the stolen base making a comeback, obviously you can only throw over a certain amount of time. So that's, of course, we don't see that anymore in 2025. That's obvious. But a pitch out you can do. Like, I'm actually sort of surprised how in this new era we don't see more pitch outs. But clearly in 1985, you will see it. That's for sure. And we saw that from Doc in that sequence when Lonnie was on first base in the third inning. The other thing that was really, really impressive was in that same sequence where Lonnie Smith got on with a one-out hit, Tommy Herr, who you mentioned was such a pain in the ass, rips a double. It took an amazing decoy, and I don't think we ever saw who it was, from either Santana or Backman. They decoyed the crap out of Lonnie Smith, and that actually kept him from scoring. And Doc was able to get through that inning, and a big part of why he got through that inning is because Santana or Backman, and I forget, maybe they did show and I just didn't write it down. Sometimes you forget. But there was a great decoy that kept Lonnie Smith from getting around the bases because he should have scored on that double. And the only reason he didn't was because you had some very smart, coy baseball from that Mets middle infield.
Well, that's the one thing you pick up on this type of game. It's a very small ball type of game. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of stolen bases, a lot of not a lot of strikeouts from Doc. So it was about the defense in this specific game. But that's what I've noticed when I've watched him back old school games when we watched the 1986 World Series. Like everything is a lot of strategy, a lot of like these old school style plays that you don't see as much now because they're not taught it.
Well, I'll tell you the other thing that was very old school, if you will. I scored the game. And that's what I do. So even an old game like this. So I used the scorebook that I have labeled as spring training. I'm holding this up for those that are consuming this on YouTube. If you're listening to the podcast, it's just literally a Bob Carpenter book that says spring training. So I score the game. I've been doing that with the rewatches where it's my spring training book. I'll score spring training games in there. I'll also score a rewatch game. So I'm scoring the game. Kind of fun. And it's only been a couple of years writing the pitcher in to the lineup and then pinch hitters and then the new pitcher. I'm not used to it anymore. It's been a long time. I mean, I guess that I'm trying to remember now. So 2021 was the last year that we had the pitcher hitting. We didn't have it in 2020 also, by the way. I know that was the weird pandemic year. So 20, 22, 23, and 24, for the last 5 seasons, we've had designated hitters. I haven't written the pitcher in. 2021 is the last time in like the last half a decade where I've done it. So to do that and then, fill in all the pitchers was, I got to tell you, it was strange. And even though I don't like the DH, I don't miss this. It's a lot of work off writing all those names in. I don't miss that at all.
Well, listen, that was the beauty of scorebook back in the day. Like, think about this. Why was a scorecard? Why did everyone always have now it's not as much of a thing, but back then it was a major thing because what else were you doing during the game? You're not on your phone. You're not looking at another TV. You're watching the game. You're in tune with the game. Maybe you're talking to your buddies. You're talking to your kids, but you're locked into the game. Well, now it's different, dude.
And that's a part of why I was scoring as a kid for different reasons, and certainly when I was even a teenager in my early to mid 20s, I just loved it. So this isn't the reason why I score games, but nowadays in 2025, with the cell phones, with the tablets, with so many distractions, I'm glad I score games because it keeps my head in the game. And I think it's much easier because I noticed this watching basketball. I love the NBA. I watch the crappy Nets every night. I watch the Knicks every night, but I get distracted easily. I mean, because of cell phones, because of tablets, because there's so many different things that can get to your brain. And baseball is the one sport because there's a mechanism to score, keeps your head in it, which I guess I appreciate.
I'm gonna throw something out there randomly. Just because I watched the O.J. Simpson documentary just recently on Netflix.
Right.
Did you know that in 94, they had it up on the Jumbotron, the Bronco, the whole video? So the NBA finals are going on, and you actually had the Bronco chase live at Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
That is outrageous.
At Madison Square Garden. I didn't realize till the documentary, to be honest, but I remember as a kid, the OJ chase, the Knicks finals game. And I felt the way I know Joe did and a lot of Knicks fans did, which is Yeah, this is interesting and all, but what's going on in the game? Like, can you give me the full screen on the game? Oh,
Yeah.
the other thing, and Wally Backman did this multiple times, was the drag bunt. And
Yes.
it's not that we don't see it anymore, but we don't see it as often as this. He laid down a bunt with one out in the second inning. It worked. He laid down a bunt with a runner on first, one out in the fourth. And this was my favorite part. They initially ruled it an error because it was a play that Jack Clark probably should have made at first base. And at this time, Jack Clark was converting from the outfield to first base. So when, and I forget because they had the rotating announcers, I forget who said it. I think it was McCarver. When he said, oh, it's an error on the first baseman, what do? I write in the error on the first baseman. And about 30 seconds later, I get they changed the scoring. It's a base hit. And so I'm annoyed, but then I'm annoyed at myself. This game's been over for 40 years. I could have gone a Baseball Reference and literally just saw if it was a hit or an error. So that made me feel like I was in real form. Oh, the other thing, you and I think this is the reaction when you watch these whole games, all the things that are so different was, so Joaquin Andujar has a very rocky first inning. He walks multiple guys, he hits a guy, walks in a run, allows the Mets to go up 2-0. Cardinals come back, they tie the game. Jack Clark hits a home run. They score a run in the third inning. Now it's a 2-2 game. Andujar gives up a home run to George Foster. Andujar has a rocky fourth inning, gets through it, but the Mets score another run. Mets scored another run in the fifth inning. RBI double by Rafael Santana. I don't know Joaquin Andujar's pitch count, but I can tell you it's very high. And when Andujar is pulled to start the sixth inning for Ken Daly, my reaction is, took a while. Like, wow, I would have pulled him earlier, or at least I'm used to him being pulled earlier. When he gets pulled after 5 innings, 8 hits, 5 runs, 2 walks, a hit batsman, a home run, the broadcast reaction is to say, wow, why'd he pull him early? And I'm thinking, he pulled him early. I mean, he wasn't good in this game. And so this is actually one of the new age aspects of baseball I'd agree with. He wasn't good. I wasn't taking him out because his pitch count. I didn't know his pitch count. I have no idea what it was. Feel for the game, I would have taken him out only because he wasn't very effective. I mean, the Mets had base runners in every inning of the game. So the reaction to Andujar coming out was sort of surprising because to me, he clearly needed to come out of the game.
No, and like I said, I thought he was going to get pulled when he first hurt his finger. Like I was surprised by that. So like, to me, that he went that long, it wasn't as effective. But that again just shows you how far the game has developed. We sit there, I mean, honestly, dude, we sit here and criticize every single time someone gets pulled, what inning it is. Always getting pulled in the fourth inning. What's going on here? Why is it too early? He's only got 70 pitches. Why are you pulling him here? But the game in 40 years has changed so much. The analytics, the way that how many times they've seen batters. I mean, that wasn't even a thought back then.
Watching this game, it was cool to see Ozzie Smith, a young Ozzie Smith, because Ozzie's one of those guys in this game that we watched. We grew up watching. I mean, Ozzie's last game in the major leagues as a 41-year-old was 1996. So certainly as a fan, I remember watching a lot of Ozzie Smith. I found this story that we're going to play for you from this game to be really curious. I didn't know that there were rumors about the Cardinals trading Ozzie Smith in 1985, and I certainly didn't know how those rumors would have even started. Here's the story as described on the broadcast on the Ozzie Smith trade rumors.
From what I've been able to understand, the Mike Schmidt rumor about Schmidt going to the Dodgers for 4 or 5 players was actually started because Bob Welch of the Dodgers overheard a conversation in which the Dodger brass were discussing Ozzie Smith being traded for 4 players.
The difference between Smith and Schmidt.
Right. And apparently it was not a conversation about Mike Schmidt, but Ozzie Smith that caused all that furor. And Ozzie Smith lines one that Strawberry cannot backhand.
So not only do you have an Ozzie Smith trade rumor to the LA Dodgers, which again, never knew existed. The only Ozzie Smith trade rumor I know is when he actually was traded for Gary Templeton years earlier. But then we get the nugget that Mike Schmidt was actually a part of trade rumors. So when I heard this story that Zabriskie was telling, I quickly said, or went on Baseball Reference and was like, where were we in Mike Schmidt's career at this point? 1985. I mean, Mike Schmidt was out of baseball before I was watching, right? I started watching in 91, 92. So he retired a few years earlier. So how old was Mike Schmidt? In 1985, Mike Schmidt was coming off a year in which he led the National League in home runs at 36. And in 85, he was 35 years old. So he was an aging player, but he was still a player kind of at the top of his game. I mean, he was still hitting a ton of home runs. He still had a few more good years in him. In fact, in 85, he went 33 and 93 with a 907 OPS. And then the following year, basically won what I think is the real Triple Crown. He led in home runs, RBIs, and OPS, screw batting average. So Mike Schmidt still had something left. And apparently there were fugazi rumors about him being traded to the LA Dodgers. And why not? The Dodgers get everybody right off.
Outrageous, dude. Why? Even back then, everybody wants to be a Dodger.
Even back then. Now, luckily, they didn't get either guy. But I found that story to be very funny to me, that it was a misunderstanding of them talking about Ozzie Smith, and that sounds like Mike Schmidt. So
that's a lot different than John Heyman putting out Arson Judge.
Yeah, even the way trade rumors were digested in 1985 was very, very different. All right, let's get to some of your emails on the Rico Rewatch number 3. The Mets winning on opening day against the St. Louis Cardinals. Good evening. Just finished watching opening day 1985, and I loved it, but there were 3 things that really stood out to me that I'd love to hear your take on. Number 1, the broadcast discussing the difference between the American League and National League umpiring and strike zone. I find this so interesting. I've always known about the differences in the leagues, but I've never seen it in action. When Hojo takes a strike early in the game, they talk about how the NL strike zone is lower than the AL strike zone and how he needs to get used to that. That's crazy to me. In today's game, with the leagues being so intertwined, there's interleague play every day. I would love to see these leagues have a little bit of their own identities again. I guess that's never happening. They also talked about how the NL and AL umpires set up different behind home plate, and that affects the strike zone. So interesting, and something that was surely gone from the league by the time I remember watching baseball. Yeah, and the reason they brought that up with Howard Johnson is, we make such a big deal on this podcast, and certainly history, that this was Gary Carter's Met debut. It was also Hojo's. The Mets had acquired him from the Detroit Tigers. So the reason that was kind of a big deal, or at least a talking point, was that Hojo was making the adjustment from being an American League player with the Tigers to now a National League player with the Mets. And Hojo walked in this game drawing in a run, or driving in a run in the first inning. He also had a blue base hit in the 9th inning. So he went 1 for 4 in his Met debut. Number 2, rotating broadcasters. This was always interesting to me, how the TV broadcasts rotate broadcasters every couple of innings or so. Our radio broadcast still does this. Howie does a few, Keith Rad does a few, then it goes back to Howie. Does this go back to the days when Lindsay, Ralph, and Bob used to switch off from TV to radio? Is it so Ralph could broadcast the games and still do Kiner's Corner? I remember this going on the TV side until the mid-1990s at least. I'd be fascinated to hear the reasoning. Yeah, I grew up with that too. Like, they had the rotating announcers. Fran Healy was a part of that. Tim McCarver and Ralph Kiner, who we heard on this broadcast. I don't love it. There was a point in the game where Tim McCarver was telling a story about running into Bob Costas while he was sitting backstage, basically, because he wasn't broadcasting. And it's so weird. Here's a guy who's in the middle of the game. He's broadcasting it. And for 3 innings, he has to leave the booth, basically. And he's walking around talking to Bob Costas about, how obsessed Costas is going to all these opening day games.
I will tell you one thing, though, that I did appreciate listening to this broadcast. Tim McCarver is way underrated. Like, I know that when he got to the national scene, a lot of people were tired of him, all that other stuff. But he was really good doing the Mets games. He really was.
Absolutely. Tim McCarver is one of my all-time favorite announcers. And I was disappointed when he wasn't doing the Mets anymore. Remember, he did the Yankees briefly on, I think it was Fox 5 on a local level when they had him. But, yeah, I'm with you. Tim McCarver is one of the best. This email from Clayton continues on to Rusty Stop. I love how the fans went crazy when he came up to hit. Yeah, Staub pinch hit in the 9th inning. At this point, the game is tied. He came up with a runner on second and 2 outs and was clearly pitched around. I mean, it was an intentional, unintentional walk. He got 4 curveballs thrown to him by, who was it? Bill Campbell? I'm looking up on my scorecard to see who
Number
it was.
13, I feel like it was. That's in my head.
Wow.
But he didn't.
It was Neil Allen who gave up the game-winning home run, and there was nothing close. Nothing close.
No. And it's funny because do you remember his numbers from the year prior, the 1984 numbers? I remember they had.
You're talking about Rusty Staub?
Yeah, the graphics were awesome because they're so old school, but they had everything laid out. And I'm looking at these numbers. I'm like, Rusty Staub, a threat right now? I think he had 1 home run the year prior.
Yeah, he had 264 the year prior. It was the end of Rusty Staub. Like, it was the very end of his career, but he was a beloved Met, and it was his second go-around. Clayton goes on to write, Vice President Bush throwing out the first pitch. That's crazy and so random. He's got nothing to do with New York. You think he would have thrown out the first pitch in Texas or something. Cool nonetheless, though. Let's go back to this. This was right before the game started. Vice President. That's weird, too, even though he was vice president for 8 years. Vice President George H.W. Bush threw out the first pitch, and here's how it sounded on the Mets broadcast.
Well, George Bush has had a pretty good 4+ years along with President Reagan, and as you can see, has now acquired his personal Mets jacket. With a good luck wish for Dwight Gooden, he will throw out the first ball. Not bad. Left-handed fielding and throwing first baseman at Yale University some years ago. Vice President Bush.
You put that very nicely.
Well, when you're speaking of a diplomat, you need to be diplomatic.
That's right.
And you can tell he's excited to be here. Of course, Mayor Koch here as well, receiving his usual huge ovation from this large crowd.
Steve, by the way, another reason for the vice president's visit today, he is with the president of Ecuador, His Excellency Leon Fabre Cordero. That's a hyphenated last name, Fabre Cordero. And so he will be having a visit to talk over the South American situation. So what do you want, folks? We got local politics, international politics, American politics, and not incidentally, a baseball game.
That's right. Baseball has its own brand of politics as well. We won't get into that.
There's so much from this. So hearing that Mayor Koch, who now has a bridge named after him, always got a rousing ovation. When did that happen with New York City mayors? The New York City mayor walks in, and of course he gets a standing ovation. But I was thinking about this. I think to answer Clayton's question, he's the sitting vice president. So even without having a direct connection to the Mets, if the sitting vice president's in town, and by the way, let's keep this in mind, and I know this is really tough to comprehend because no matter what political party you're in or whoever you voted for, we truly have not had a loved president by everybody since Reagan. And I know everyone didn't love him. I'm not implying that that was the case, but he did win a landslide. And I don't mean a landslide. I mean a landslide. He just came off an election in which he won every state but one. I'm not kidding you. So anytime anyone else talks about landslides, they're not real. That's a landslide. So again, I know that there are people listening who are like, I didn't like Reagan. What are you talking about? Okay, fine. I'm not saying everyone liked him, but he was very popular, more popular than any president we've had since. And so I think when you have the vice president who just got reelected in historic numbers, you could put that guy in any city and he's probably going to get cheered, and it's a cool thing. So I think it's as simple as that. I mean, Tim McCarver basically explained it. He was in town and he put the Met jacket on. He was a lefty. He looked great throwing. I mean, father like son, man. They know how to throw out first pitches, HW and W. And it was a cool thing. I know we think of George H.W. Bush more as the president, as the one-term president, but he was the vice president. And again, this is 1985. This is a few months after they got reelected, and reelected in a way in which literally they lost one state and the District of Columbia. So I thought that was very cool, though, to see. Very cool to see that kind of first pitch.
Well, that was cool. And the one thing I will tell you is that rewatching this whole episode, there was a lot of cool things that didn't happen during the game. Like it was the fact that it's opening day and we did see all the buildup. Like that was part of the interest about this game was you saw that they talked about they went through a lot of different things. They had a lot of different like what happened last year, set up the scene, and then in between you had the old school movie commercials or all these like promos and stuff like that. I kind of appreciated that. That was awesome.
That is one of the fun parts about the rewatches when you go back in time and you're really back in time. That's for sure. This is going to be what I'm about to read an all-time email. All-time email. Because we've talked about how Doc labored, how there were a lot of pitches thrown in this game, how it was a 3-hour, 42-minute game. What have I told you? The email I'm about to read is a guy who was so into the Rico rewatch, he counted all of those pitches.
No.
That's right. Jim writes, Evan Hoff, if you pull up the rewatch game on Baseball Reference, you'll see there's no pitch data. It's very scarce before 1987 or so. I used to be a backup reporter for Stats Inc., and every now and then, if I rewatch an old game, I'll keep track of pitches if that game's pitch data is missing. The goal is to compile that data and then provide it to Retro Sheet, who will then provide it to Baseball Reference. I've already offered it to Baseball Reference, and they asked me to go through Retro Sheet. In any case, I provide to you, so you can incorporate in the Rico rewatch, if you find it useful, the pitch data. Let me know if you need any other missing data, and I'll do what I can. Thank you, Jim. And I apologize. I didn't get to write Jim back a thank you, so I'm going to do that as soon as we're done with this Rico. But hopefully Jim is listening and can appreciate this. Jim, awesome work. So let's play a game. Pete Hoffman, you watched the entire game. We mentioned Doc Gooden labored. He has supplied us how many pitches Doc threw in each inning, including his entire amount of pitches that he threw. The final line on Doc, by the way, 6+ innings. He started the 7th inning, gave up back-to-back hits to Andy Van Slyke and Ozzie Smith. Then he came out for Doug Sisk with 2 on and nobody out, leading 5-2. 6+ innings, 6 hits, 4 runs, 6 strikeouts, 2 walks. How many pitches did Doc Gooden throw in the 6+ innings he was allowed to pitch in his first start of 1985?
How many walks?
2 walks, 6 innings. He faced, if you want the batter's face, 26 batters. So it's actually a pitching line that's similar to what you would see in 2025. Like it's not, I know we don't see 6 innings all the time, but 6 innings, 6 hits, 4 runs, 6 strikes. It's not crazy. So I think Davey was actually quicker on the hook because it was opening day.
I will say they let him go 96 pitches.
96 pitches. You would be incorrect.
Oh, boy.
He threw. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say maybe one Met threw more pitches than this all season long in 2024. Maybe 1, maybe 2, because it's not 150. I can tell you that, but it's a high number. Doc Gooden, according to this wonderful email from Jim, threw 116 pitches in 6+ innings.
Wow.
We talked about the first inning, right? The first inning was a 1-2-3 inning. He threw 24 pitches in the first inning, which is the most pitches he threw in any inning, and yet it was a 1-2-3 inning. He threw 20 in the second inning and 24 in the third inning. So his pitch count through 3 innings was 68 pitches, which is incredibly high. He was actually really economical in the last 3 innings he pitched. He threw 13, 16, and 14 pitches before finally only throwing 5 in that 7th inning when he faced 2 batters. Jim also tells us that he had 4 full counts, 3 of them in the first inning. He threw first pitch strikes to 11 of the 28 hitters he faced, 11 swinging strikes. Tommy Herr had 10 foul balls in this game. That's the one you wanted to know because Tommy was a pain in the ass.
That bastard, yeah.
Now, as far as Joaquin Andujar is concerned, we talked about him coming out after 5 innings and Tim McCarver and Steve Trubisky saying, or Ralph Kiner, I forget who was calling it at the time, saying, wow, I'm surprised they took him out. 5 innings, 8 hits, 4 strikeouts, 2 walks. Would you like to guess a pitch count on Joaquin Andujar?
And he gave up how many runs at that point in time?
He ended up giving up 5 runs through 5. It was 5 full innings. He faced 27 batters. So he faced actually one more batter than Doc. Doc only faced 26 batters in this game. Andujar faced 27. Gave up a home run, 8 hits, 2 walks, a hit batsman. How many pitches did he throw?
If Doc threw 116, I'll go 122.
He actually threw less than Doc, 103.
Wow.
103 pitches, which is not, it's not obscene, but remember, it's opening day.
Yeah.
This pitch count thing would be more normal in July, not the first game of the season. So according to Jim, if you take Andujar and Doc, and we mentioned how the game dragged, there were 134 pitches through the first 3 innings of this game with 5 runs scored. Obviously, the Mets scored the 2 in the first. St. Louis got 1 in the second, 1 in the third. Mets got a run in the third. 134 pitches, 5 runs over the first 3 innings.
How many pitches were thrown in the entirety? Does he have that?
I could add it up because he actually supplied the pitch count for everybody.
Dude, that's incredible. While you're doing that, can I just give you some weird? I looked at opening day from 2024. Quintana went 4 2/3. He pitched 85 pitches. Freddie Peralta, who's facing the Mets, he went 6 innings, 92 pitches. And Gooden went 116.
116. I would be curious. How many Mets starters threw more than 116 pitches in a game in 2024? I bet you it's a few. Like I said, 1, because Sevy had that complete game. So I'm thinking like maybe that game. Right. And I think Quintana had a game in which he threw a ton of pitches, but it's not a lot. I mean, that's the point. Like, it's not a lot. It certainly wasn't Doc Gooden's best performance. And that's the thing. A part of me kind of wants to rewatch another game from 1985 so we could get the full Doc Gooden experience, because we certainly didn't get that in this game. I mean, it was he struggled. It was not a dominant performance. Here's another email. This is from Corey, who writes, couple of observations. How many African Americans were playing in this game? Ozzie Smith, Lonnie Smith, Terry Pendleton, Willie McGee, Darryl Strawberry, Mookie Wilson, George Foster, Doc Gooden. I can't name one African American player on the Mets today. Well, look, this is something that MLB knows about. We all know about. It's just there's less black baseball players today than there were in 1985 for whatever reason. I think kids grow up, maybe they don't want to play baseball. And I don't think it's just a racial thing. I think it's a lot of Americans have grown up saying, I'd rather play football. I'd rather play basketball. I'd rather play hockey. But you're certainly right about that. But it's something we kind of know about. That's why Major League Baseball has so many good initiatives where they try to reach out to that community and get more kids to play. Go ahead.
There's also one thing that I noticed too about this game, and you kind of said about it early on with the win factor. How much debris was on the field during the game? I mean, so much so that Keith Hernandez had to stop a pitch because there was like a piece of paper floating around. He couldn't focus. It was outrageous.
Yeah. You know, the weather hasn't really changed that much. Like opening day this year, we may get that same weather, like 40 degrees, windy, hopefully sunny, which they got in this game. But you're right. It feels like they did a worse job of corralling the garbage that went everywhere, because the place was a mess. It was an absolute pigsty by the end of the game. But the end of the game was amazing, because after Doug Sisk blew the game in the 9th inning and he issues a bases-loaded walk to Jack Clark, and then finally Davey Johnson woke up and said, let me call Jesse Orozco, who got the huge ground out of Tito Landrum, who owned him in 1984. How about that? Whitey was waiting for that Tito Landrum-Jesse Orozco matchup. And the Mets failed to score in the 9th inning, had a golden opportunity. Mookie Wilson flied out. It set up this incredible moment. A tie game, the bottom of the 10th inning. And here's Gary Carter, who at this point in this game had been hit twice, including in the 1st inning, where we mentioned we thought he wasn't going to stay in the game. Got hit in the 8th inning as well, but that was on a curveball. He had a double in the 6th inning, and he came up with 1 out and nobody on, and a tie game in the bottom of the 10th inning. And this is the thing everybody remembers. So let's all soak it in together.
Another breaking ball, and this could be the ball game. Deep to left.
out of here. Gary Carter, a game-winning home run in the bottom of the 10th inning, and the Mets win on opening day 6-5. Welcome to New York, Gary Carter.
This game started with the World Series atmosphere, and I think it has more one right now. About 40% of these fans have fanned out of here at Shea Stadium, and I'm telling you, he did not hit a bad pitch. A nasty curveball, low and away. Woo!
I mean, the Tim McCarver, woo! You know, the first woo, you're not sure, is that Tim McCarver? Like, where did that come from? But then when he adds the second woo, you're like, wow, Tim McCarver is pretty pumped up.
Well, dude, I mean, that was an amazing home run. He's right. He freaking got a hold of that ball.
He sure did, man. Like, that was a curveball from Neil Allen, who was traded for Keith Hernandez, and he hits that laser beam that just somehow gets out. And I was thinking about where that ball landed, kind of similar to the Endy Chavez Rob job from 2006. Not too different, but fortunately, Lonnie Smith was not able to pull off the Endy Chavez and make that catch. Great moment for Gary Carter. Keith Hernandez was also great in this game. I mean, Keith made one awesome defensive play on a bunt in which he had such nifty footwork around first base. Keith's one of those guys where, man, it sucks I didn't get to appreciate his defense every day. But everybody tells us he's the greatest defensive first baseman of all time. I'm not going to disagree, even if we do a podcast called Rico Brogna. But I wasn't able to appreciate it. I mean, Keith Hernandez was well away from the Mets and out of baseball when I started watching it. But clearly we get to see these little snippets, and he's just so smooth. And obviously offensively, he was great. He had the RBI single in the first. He had an RBI single in the fourth. He had a 2-out single in the sixth. He drew the walk in the eighth. Unfortunately, he struck out in the 10th on a pitch that was borderline. But Keith, we got the full great Keith Hernandez experience. And then you had Gary Carter hitting the game-winning home run. It was ugly. It wasn't pretty. It was boring at times. But hey, it's a classic moment in Met history because Gary Carter hit a walk-off home run in his Met debut.
And don't forget about Mookie Wilson, because he played a hell of a defense out in center field. That's one person where it's like you don't realize how great of a center fielder he is until you go back and watch him play.
No, you're right. And he also, while batting second in this game with Wally Backman leading off, was that stolen base threat. You know, he gets that single in the first inning, and what does he do? He steals second base. He comes up with a base hit in the eighth inning. Mets are looking for an insurance run. What does he do? He steals second base. Like, he was automatic. And, you know, it's an art that's coming back a little bit, but obviously the Mets don't have anybody on their team nowadays, the threat of a Mookie Wilson. So it was fun to watch him. It was fun really to watch everybody. I mean, George Foster was the one guy that I looked at and said, it's kind of similar to what I said about Doug Sisk. What do I know about George Foster? Okay, part of Big Red Machine, but I also know he was a big Met free agent signing. Or I think he was technically a trade, then they signed him. But whatever. They signed him. Not to get into technicalities on this. And he was a bust. You know, to most Met fans, they didn't like George Foster. And he certainly didn't even finish the 86 season. They ended up releasing him in the middle of the 86 year. But on this given day, he was great. Hits a home run in the third inning, gets a base hit in the fifth inning. So I wasn't excited to see George Foster, but we got to see a good George Foster on this opening day.
No, that was one thing that I remember texting you too while I was watching. I go, guy's a beast, dude. Like, you could see why the Mets went and got him. You could see why the Mets thought he'd be a piece of this puzzle. And it's unfortunate, but like sometimes it misses, and that it ended up being a miss, but turned out well for the Mets anyway the next year.
Overall, what was fun about rewatching this game is that this is the depths of the offseason. Okay, we have not watched baseball in a very long time. We've talked a lot about baseball. We have Ricos all the time in which we're analyzing the offseason and what a team should do and what they shouldn't do. So it was nice, even if it was 40 plus years ago or 40 years ago, because I guess this is technically the 40-year anniversary of that game coming up in April. It was nice to watch a baseball game. You know, considering we do a baseball podcast and think about the amount of hours hopefully you spend listening to the Rico, and certainly we spend talking about baseball. It's nice to watch a damn baseball game. We haven't watched a baseball game involving our team since, it's cool to say this, mid-October. Usually we say late September, but hey, this year we got to extend it a couple of weeks. So I think that was the fun part, just getting to watch this team play baseball and knowing there was going to be, maybe not in 1985, but there was going to be a happy ending with this core, obviously winning a World Series 1 year later.
Would you like to do one more before the season starts? Would you be interested in that or no? Is that this too much?
I'd be interested in it, but the thing I would want to do differently is do a pennant race game. Like a game, before this, the 2 Rico rewatches we have done before this one was the brutal Game 7 loss to the St. Louis Cardinals in 2006 NLCS and winning the World Series in 1986, Game 7. What I think is an underrated game because we all think about Game 6. So we did playoff games, and this was our first regular season game, but the more I watched it, the more I'm like, it's just opening day. Like, it's exciting in the moment because baseball's back, but it doesn't really mean anything. It's 1 of 162. So if we do another Rico rewatch, the one thing I would want to do differently is make it like a big game. And there's a lot of options if we do it again. We could actually pick a game from this past season. We could rewatch. In fact, I'll tell you the game I was thinking about. With 2 games I was thinking about if we rewatch the game season. The game in Toronto where there being no hit into the 9th inning and Lindor hits the game-tying home run. I was on the air for it, so I didn't score it. It was tough to watch. And I don't know how many people watched it. It was a weekday afternoon game in September. Like, I think it was one of those games that maybe a lot of people didn't watch. And then the other game I would consider, or I'd consider all of them, but you know what I mean, like I'm suggesting, is the game in Arizona after they blew it with Edwin Diaz on the grand slam by Corbin Carroll. They played a game the next day, and it turned out to be, pound for pound, one of the biggest games of the year because it gave them the tiebreak, which, looking back on the way the season concluded, how important that tiebreaker was, that last game in Arizona. But I'm open to anything.
You know what? You're so full of it. You want to do that Toronto game because you want to score it.
Is that the reason?
That's exactly why. There's probably like 5 games that you weren't able to score properly. Oh, the Toronto game's won. I'll put that on this list.
Touche, sir. Touche. It's a great point. Well, we hope you enjoyed the Rico rewatch. We hope that even if you didn't watch the game and take 3.5 hours out of your time to watch a game from 1985 on YouTube, we hope you enjoyed the podcast. Hopefully we were able to paint the good enough picture that you were able to live in the moment of that day, April 9th, 1985. We appreciate you listening, watching if you consumed us on YouTube, and downloading us. Thank you very much for another edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.